Hi everyone, I'm Paige with the Billings Symphony. I'm super excited to be here at the historic Billings Depot, welcoming Toomai Quintet to Billings, Montana. We have a Sukin Series concert where this wonderful string ensemble will be performing, and I just want to get a chance to learn a little bit more about this group that came in from New York, and also one of your first concerts since, gosh, pre-pandemic time. Pretty excited to have you here. Welcome to Billings.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I wanted to introduce everybody first. Maybe we'll just go around the room and introduce yourselves and let me know a little bit about your background. We'll start with you, Alex.
I'm Alex Fortas. I play violin. I lived in New York for almost 15 years, but I grew up in San Diego, California.
Awesome. Awesome. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Emilie-Anne Gendron. I play the violin, and I was born and grew up in the Hartford, Connecticut area, and came to New York City about 20 years ago for school and never left.
Awesome.
I'm Andrewroydstein. I'm the bass player in Toomai Quintet. I'm originally from Los Angeles, California, but have been living in New York actually same amount of time as Emily. We met as Juilliard students when we were in college.
I'm Hamilton. I'm cellist with the group. I'm from Nashville. I also moved to New York in the early aughts and met Emily and Andrew at Juilliard.
And I'm George. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, and I play viola. Been living in New York for 6 years.
I'm so glad to have you all here. And you all have kind of a different meeting story as well. I know that maybe you two know each other from Nashville and then met in the School of Juilliard about 15 or so years ago. Was the beginnings of the Toomai Quintet?
The quintet started when we were grad students. About 15 years ago, we were in graduate school and took a course on audience engagement and doing really in-depth work in schools. And we won a chamber music competition at the 92nd Street Y for ensembles interested in community engagement. And that had us playing concerts for groups of about 900 K through second graders, and we loved it so much that we decided we were going to, keep on going after school. And 15 years later, we're still going strong, and we've grown in so many different ways. But really at the core of the ensemble is the work that we do in our communities and with young people.
Yeah, we were really excited to have you out to the Yellowstone Boys and Girls Ranch while you were here and get to play for students. And that's really the heart of Toomai Quintet, is getting in front of students. What do you like about working with young people especially?
Hamilton, you want to answer that?
Sure. I think it's fascinating that every group is different and every group has a different energy, and it's a fun challenge for us to try to figure out how to engage with this particular group the best way. I think yesterday we came in and the energy seemed hectic while we were setting up, and then so I had some apprehension, and then once we started playing, the attention of the group really snapped in, and they actually turned out to be one of the best groups we played for in recent memory in terms of the level of listening that was happening and the questions they were asking, the creative prompts they were giving us. We had a fun activity where they were giving me and Andrew some prompts to improvise in different moods. And improvising is something we do a little bit of in this group as well. And I think the whole interactive concert thing is improvising. We do a lot of planning, but we also have to do a lot of on the spot changes to tweak to a particular audience. But overall, it seemed like a really great group of kids to work with. And
yeah, I loved your improv, Hamilton, on cello, just kind of creating a different mood for the emotions that the students were throwing out there. So kind of connecting that musical energy with an emotion that they can associate and start to see those different ways that you can create that sound. It was really, really powerful. Yeah.
Thanks.
And Emily, tell me a little bit about your role with engaging with students. I know that you were able to kind of give a nice storyline and a backstory of music. How do you connect with young audiences?
Yeah, well, I think the really the most important thing to me about connecting with, especially young audiences, and especially in cases where they may be going through a difficult time in their lives at present, is the importance that, in our case, music, but really all the arts and humanities have in their education and their engagement with the world, because it sort of sparks the imagination, and in a way, like, sometimes we discount how important imagination is. There's that famous Einstein quote, "Imagination is more important than knowledge." And it's kind of true, because with imagination, that's the thing that lets you hope or imagine yourself in a situation that might not be where you are at the moment, or you could imagine things being different.
Yeah.
So that's what I think is most important about the work that Toomai does with students, is just teaching them to keep that part of their awareness kind of alive.
Yeah,
It's
I
important.
loved when you were asking them to engage. One of the students threw out imagination, play imagination. What does that sound like? And that was a really cool interactive piece. Yeah. And George, you said something I thought was really interesting, which is that all the different music that Toomai brings all talks to each other. And I was really curious what you meant about that, because there's so many different genres that you explore.
Well, I guess for context, I mean, some of the music that we played yesterday and some of the music that we'll be playing tonight at the Depot here is music from Latin America, from Mexico, from Cuba, from Brazil, and in large part and I should definitely ask you all to make sure that I'm saying these things correctly. Some of the early arrangements for the quintet were coming from, I think, Andrew, being a bass player, wanting to make music for this instrumentation and not wanting to be limited by there are some great pieces for this instrumentation, but not a ton of them. And growing up with a love of some of the music by composers like La Quona and by Manuel Ponce and Heitor Villa-Lobos. So if you take piano pieces by them, which some of the pieces we're playing, Andrew's made beautiful arrangements of, that's some of the music that we're playing. And that's music that I didn't grow up knowing, in the same way that, there was, I think, actually, even in the family, for Andrew. I did grow up playing fiddle music, being from Nashville and going to fiddle camp, and so having a little bit of awareness of some of what goes on outside of Western classical music. And one thing that always interests me about some of the pieces that Andrew that everyone has contributed to the group at different points, is the interaction between, in the lives of the composers that I mentioned. They were, in each case, accomplished classical, Western classical musicians, people that really, to an extent, came from that tradition, no matter where they studied, or at least were proficient and had an awareness, more than proficient, and at the same time brought a real interest in and care for the music of the place they were from, be it popular music, folk music, whatever. And so a lot of what they did in their lifetime was finding the ways that those things could interact in their own music, and also in institutions and venues and whatever, just in every way, I think, in every aspect of their musical lives. So it's in some ways a familiar concept to somebody like me who didn't even grow up knowing that music, and it's wonderful to explore it in this context, and that's kind of what I mean. There's overlapping threads with all of those.
Yeah. How did Nashville shape your musical love? You mentioned fiddle and some of the more southern traditions. What was it like growing up in the Nashville music scene?
No, it's just the same. I honestly feel like it's the same thing as I think each of us is bringing a different version of that to this. Growing up playing classical music and playing Western classical music and learning some of what you learned going to those camps, and then also just having exposure to another way of doing things is really what it's, just in simplest, vaguest terms, that's what's nice about it. But
Yeah. Well, in Hamilton, you actually played with George's parents, if I understand correctly.
Yeah.
So you have a long tie together in Nashville.
Right. Yeah, no, George's parents are both on faculty at the Blair School of Music at Vanderbilt, which has a really great pre-college music program. So that's how I got started with cello, and how I met George eventually, and then our paths crossed again in New York
Yeah.
many years later. So.
Well,
yeah.
and on cello, you have a lot of freedom. I understand all of these different instruments bring so much, and collectively, you're creating an entire orchestra within the strings. How do you concept the pieces that you bring? You know, how do you come together and say this is what we want to perform?
Yeah, it's one of the things that has been just a really amazing thing about this quintet and about this group of people also is the amazing variety of backgrounds and traditions that people bring to the table, musically and culturally. And I think we kind of craft our programs in different ways. It really depends on where we're playing and what we're really passionate about and what we're really listening to. And that, I think over the 15 years we've been a group, it's really changed a lot in a very kind of natural way. So, I mean, I'm just trying to think that because we started off, I think one of the first pieces we played was the Dvorak-based quintet, which is arguably the most famous piece of music. But then to round out our program, actually one of the pieces we're playing tonight, La Comparsa by Ernesto Lecona, is one of the first pieces we played as a group. We did a Romanian tune, and so from the very beginnings we were playing very different styles that represented the various interests of the group, and it kind of showed what we were listening to, what we wanted to learn more, and used the quintet as sort of a way of getting more into that music. And the last couple of years, in 2008 we released an album called Cuerdas Cubanas, which means Cuban strings, and that is it's all music by Cuban composers, and that was inspired by, actually it was inspired by a lot of piano pieces, because my grandmother was from Cuba, and she was a pianist, she was a concert pianist, and so there's a lot of these pieces by Lecona, but then some other things that I heard around the house, so music by Celia Cruz and Benny Moré, who are, icons of the Cuban popular music from the 50s and 60s. Those were music that I always just wanted to play, and this group is always one to try things out and really dig deeply. So not just saying, okay, let's do the best that we can. Well, we always do the best that you can, and we're always trying to grow more and more. But that album was it was the first one, and it was actually dedicated to my grandmother, who had us in Miami and hosted us at a couple of concert festivals and things like that. But that was very concentrated focus on Cuban music, and really music by composers from between the 1920s and the 1950s. And then since that project, we've been, the Latin American focus has really blossomed in the sense that we've been working with a lot of living composers from Cuba, but also from Brazil and some other places. And just from these friendships that we're making with people, it allows us to really grow the repertoire that we're playing. And I guess the last thing I'll add about this sort of immersion in Latin American music is that it allows us to actually go deep into very distinct, different musical traditions, and that's something that we really feel strongly about when we play Latin American music. It's we want people to really understand all the distinct and special qualities that each composer has, and that they're bringing from their cultures that they come from.
Yeah. I'm glad you got into the Cuban background, because I was really curious why Cuban music, what really influenced you, and it sounds like it's in your lineage as well.
Yeah, my dad plays in a salsa band, and then my mom is from Cuba, and so I grew up in LA, but spent a lot of my life in Miami. And actually, some of the music when we're playing today, it feels almost as much from Miami as it does from Cuba. So.
Oh, how fun. Well, and you mentioned living composers, and I was curious how valuable it is to, balance out your repertoires with some of the greats, and then really focus on new and living compositions. Let's turn to you, Alex. So what kind of music are you focused on when you look for a living composer, for instance?
I think that's a huge question. What's great about a living composer is that you can, it's impossible to label them, you know, and there's always in marketing and in branding, it's useful to be like, well, this is the Mozart of San Diego, or and even to the extent that someone might sound like someone else, or, you know, I think also in startup culture, you know, that's the same, you know, this is an Uber for salsa music or something, you know, and that's helpful, but usually as you get to know composers, you realize their complexity, and sometimes it's a problem if you think the piece that you know, that you heard, that made you want to work with them is going to be exactly what they're going to write. You're often very surprised, because composers that are alive are constantly exposed to new experiences, new techniques, new ways of writing, new sounds, and so often they will write something that doesn't sound like anything you've heard of theirs before, and that's something that is very different from programming a body of work from a composer that is not living. Is that there's, for many of the famous ones, there are academics that have spent their whole lives studying their style and their lives and the way that they changed over time, but also identifying all the essential elements. But when you're working with a living composer, and these days many of these living composers are also colleagues of ours we perform with, you're constantly surprised both by getting to know more about who they are as a person and as a musician, and also for what they have to say in music.
Now, I know that all of you are incredibly busy outside of the quartet as well. Everyone operates as full-time musicians. This is your everyday job, and I know that's kind of a bit of a hustle sometimes. How do you put together your income and your world with all these different projects? What are you into these days?
How do I put together my income? I'm into being able to pay rent.
Right? I know. To some people a dream to be a working musician, but the back end of it looks very difficult, and I know that there's probably a lot of different jobs and roles that you have to take part in.
I think each of us have a slightly different answer to this, but New York is an incredibly vibrant musical place. It's one of the few places in the world where there are hundreds or thousands of people all making a living as full-time musicians. And usually it is by stitching together a portfolio. I'm a member of a few different groups, the chamber music and chamber orchestra groups that usually have a calendar that goes out several years, and so at some level I know some of what I'll be doing between, let's say, right now and 2024, but then there's little gaps, and some things can come in the day before where all of a sudden someone gets sick and they're like, can you come in and sub for me because I really need you for this rehearsal or this concert, or sometimes there can be some projects that are more ad hoc, and stitching it together, I mean, it really is like a quilt of things, and there's always a balance of, well, here's something that's available that I know will get me the money I need in order to survive in New York City, and then there's those things that are passion projects where, like, I really believe in everything about this, and no matter what else comes up, I'm going to keep a window of time to make sure that I see this through, because I think it's an important artwork and important for humans and important for us.
Yeah. Excellent answer. Thank you. And Emily, I was curious about your patchwork, your quilt. What does your quilt look like?
Yes, it's like scheduling Tetris. That's what it is. Yeah, well, to be very brief in a nutshell, so outside of Toomai, one of my biggest focuses is my string quartet, the Mont Quartet. We try not to limit ourselves, so we're basically music is music for Momenta, and we're interested in music of all cultures, all time periods, a wide range of aesthetics. We do have a big focus on contemporary music and composers, but not only from America and Europe, but from the developing world. We are also active with commissioning new works from these composers and juxtaposing those works alongside pieces from the canon or from the more distant past. Let's see, this coming month, other than some shows with a some shows and projects with Toomai. I'm looking forward to recording a CD with Momenta of Julian Carrillo, who was a historic Mexican microtonal composer, and some concerts with Orpheus Chamber Ensemble and Talia Ensemble, which is also focusing on new music. And yeah, it's kind of, as you said, it's a hustle. It's never a dull moment. And if anything, part of being a freelancer in New York is kind of, as Alex alluded to, knowing how to budget your energy and your own time and focus, and when to say no, sadly.
Sure.
So.
Well, it sounds like you're into a lot of really exciting projects, so. Yeah, and I'm curious for you, Andrew, that you carry around a huge bass, or at least there's one where you're headed. Does your instrument dictate, anything for you as far as travel is concerned, or the gigs that you choose to join?
I mean, not really, because that's the thing that I'm committed to is playing the bass and bringing that bass to the concerts that I'm going to play. And so, I mean, Billings Symphony was so generous to lend me a bass for this concert today, so I didn't have to take my bass on the
Yeah,
airplane.
you probably have to get a plane seat and a taxi
yeah.
ride and all of that.
Yeah, and so that when I don't have to do that, it's so nice. But people ask me every single day, probably when I go into the subway, I'll bet you wish you played, and then insert the smaller instrument.
Right. And you wanted to play the cello, right?
Well, they'll say, I bet you wish you played the this. And I'll be like, no, I'm pretty happy doing this. But yeah, actually, originally I wanted to play the cello when I was in about 4th grade, and they didn't have any at the school, so they gave me a bass. And and then I ended up still learning cello because I love the cello and the music, but I was already on my, path to becoming a professional bass player, and then since then I do a lot of educational work, work in schools. So aside from the Toomai String Quintet, I have a full-time job as the Director of Education and Community Engagement at the Orchestra of St. Luke's, which Alex is actually an ensemble member of that group. So we work together in different ways, but through that position, I oversee a lot of concerts that we give to about 10,000 kids a year. We produce concerts for young people, and then we do free concerts in the community. And a lot of the time I've spent working as a teaching artist prior to this in the last 15, 20 years of a career. So I was working as a teaching artist in the New York Philharmonic and at Carnegie Hall. And one of my favorite things, I'm bringing it back to the bass, is that I've done a lot of recorder work with students, and we do a lot of composing. Kids do a lot of composing on the recorder, and so when I would be on the subway, I'd have my bass, but I would also have a recorder in the pocket of it. And so one time somebody said to me, I bet you wish you rather played the flute. And I was like, actually, and then I took my recorder out of my bass case. It was on the train, so I didn't play because I wanted to have it be a nice sounding ride.
Oh, I love that. So dimensional. There's a lot going on in your world, all of your worlds. Yeah, and I know Hamilton too with the cello. It's your love. And how do you kind of piecemeal your work together? Or what are you focused on?
Oh man, yeah. I think Alex and Emily and Andrew all summed it up well. My main other performing pursuit is I'm in a string quartet called Public Quartet. I guess our main thing at the moment is improvising in various styles. We have an album coming out soon called What is American, that's kind of a concept album talking about various styles of American music and interweaving that with American history and a lot of improvising.
Valuable time to be having these discussions.
Yeah, I guess so. But the other side of my life at this point, it's actually inspired in part by a Toomai performance that I saw as an audience member, like way before I joined the group. Actually, I think way back in 2010, I want to say. I saw, I think Emily and Andrew were both there at that point, but I saw Toomai play at Sing Sing Prison in New York. It was a really moving experience for me. Around that time, I also played at Rikers Island with another chamber group and felt the same kind of emotional response to working with incarcerated people. So at this point, I'm assistant program director for Musicambia, which is a nonprofit that supplements Carnegie Hall's program at Sing Sing Prison. So we go up, or pre-COVID, we went up maybe twice a month and worked with students up there. And we're finally, after many months of sending in remote assignments and sheet music, we're finally getting the teaching going again. But that's been a very meaningful thing in my life for the last 5 years or so.
Well, thank you for doing that. The symphony works here as well in the women's prison, and
cool.
one of our guitarists is graduating the program and also moving on out of the prison and teaching her own guitar lessons. So it's just so rewarding to see what a difference music can make in people's lives. So yeah, I just wanted to wrap this up, George. I didn't want to miss out on hearing what you're up to, but just in the last minute that we have here, how do you? How is your work flowing?
I split my time. I mean, Alex said it so elegantly at the beginning. And for me, the combination includes writing music. That's part of what I'm interested in. And then I mentioned already that the fiddle playing is something I grew up with, and whenever I get a chance to try to get a little better at that, I try to take it.
Awesome. Well, it's such a joy to have you all here. The Toomai String Quintet will be on tour, and look for them at a city near you, but we're so glad to have them here in Billings, Montana. Thank you all for joining us and
Thanks for
having a
having us.
conversation.
Thank you.
All righty.